I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Shirley Weber, our Secretary of State. Dr. Weber, can you take on?
Yes, and good morning. I'm glad to be with all of my colleagues, my comrades, those of us who are seniors. It's great to be there with you. I'm excited about all of the work that you do and that you consistently do on our behalf. I'm honored to be really a senior, to be 73 years old. And to be the Secretary of State, which says that there's still a lot more that we have to give. And we still have a tremendous responsibility for not only what has been given to us, but what we have to give to those, the other generations. So often I am confronted with the concern that folks have. I remember when I was preparing to run for the Assembly, some 10 years ago, and in 2012. And one of my friends, I thought was my friend, and probably is a friend, basically said, "Aren't you a little bit too old to be running?" And she says, "I can barely get out of bed myself." And she was going on telling me all of her woes. And I thought it was kind of interesting. And I had to remind her, I said, well, you know, are you aware of the fact that I'm an African-American woman, that we start far behind the line and sometimes the race is longer and harder, and that we can never afford to give up because there's just too much for us to do, not only for ourselves, but for others. And so it's been interesting because I recently, when I saw her, she said, "Wow, you do more than young people." I said, "That's because I know more than they know." You know, I mean, I understand the threat greater than they do. And I have seen what happens when you sit down, when you decide you've done enough, when you give in and give up, and then we have to sit around and try to pick things back up and to move them forward. I said, I understand that this journey is a life journey. I told someone when I was with my kids, when they got a little bit older, and they said, "Oh, you know, you're almost finished." And I said, "Listen, motherhood is a life sentence. You're not going to get out of this life alive without it. You're not going to get away from it. You will be a mother all of your life, either to your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, your friends. That the things that you have acquired in terms of a level of sensitivity is so extremely important." You know, I was honored when the governor asked me to consider being Secretary of State. I had not even thought about being Secretary of State. I had a wonderful career as a legislator, and like most of us, thinking about retirement, and figured I could count on one hand how many years I had left before I could actually retire and do what I was going to do originally, which is to build this amazing house overlooking the Volta Lake in Ghana, with this land that a friend was going to give me. And I realized then, I said, well, let me think about it. And then I began to understand the challenge that we face in this nation. And the challenge my father faced 70 years ago when he came to California when he came sneaking out of Hope, Arkansas to get on a train to save his life and eventually change the life of his children. That there are many, many things that still remain. And unfortunately for us, in my generation and our generation, we thought we had conquered those monsters somewhat, that we thought we had put them away, that we had put them in cages and locked them up so that no one could ever see them again. And yet we are now faced with the same monsters again that folks faced 50, 60 years ago. We're faced with that same ugly issues of race and gender and ageism and all of those ugly things that we see. And so when I was asked to consider being Secretary of State, I thought to myself, who better to fight for this issue of democracy than a kid whose father had been denied so much during his lifetime and fought so hard to create an opportunity for himself and for his family. And so I come to this work recognizing, as I did when I did an interview, saying that our democracy is fragile. And nobody believed me on December 22nd, 2020. No one believed me when I said this democracy is fragile. But I think people believe now after January 6th that this democracy is fragile. They also realize that the democracy around the world is under attack now with Ukraine. And we can see that this world is fragile, that it continues to be very dependent upon not just the rules that are written in a book, but people to embrace it, to take it to heart, and to work hard to make it happen. And who knows better than our generation? Who knows better than those of us who have really worked hard to change the narrative and find ourselves once again having to repeat ourselves over and over again as we face the ugly monsters of this generation. You know, I've made a commitment all of my life. I tell folks that the journey we're on is a life journey. It's not about, achieving a goal and getting there. It's a journey. It's a life journey. It is something that we will continue to work on all of our lives because it demands the kind of attention that only those who are committed can give to it. And it may get tired, you may get weary, you may get tired, you may be somehow or another exhausted from saying the same thing over and over. But I always remind myself that being tired and being given up is worse than the battle itself, because then I have to watch the destruction and I have to watch the decline. And I have to see people say things that I thought they would never say before, that I have to, at that point, realize that the world gets better when we're silent versus when we're not. And so, so I come to you as the Secretary of State, committed to make sure that things are done, that we have an opportunity. We're doing some amazing things in terms of our businesses and making sure that those businesses, once again, and we're growing again in business, our economy is growing again, even with all the inflation and stuff that's there, there's evidence that our economy is growing and our businesses are growing, our filings are up, those kinds of things are up. We're working with our nonprofits to make sure that they have the kind of support that they need in order to make to survive and to thrive in this particular state. Because one of the things we discovered with COVID was that so many depend upon our nonprofits. So many seniors, so many young people, so many families are dependent upon these nonprofits. But as a government, we do so much. But what stands in the gap, the additional piece that needs to be done, whether it's people coming into folks' homes with meals or caring for children, it really is filled by our nonprofits. And when they begin to shake and fall, so do our families and our communities. And so we're working to try to figure out how we can support nonprofits, but how we can also educate them on how to survive in these difficult times when something like a pandemic comes along, because we saw what happens when the pandemics come. It's those agencies that are very sophisticated, that are very large, are the ones who gobble up the resources and can survive. And yet the agencies that we're used to working with, the smaller ones, are struggling to keep their doors open because they didn't know where to file, how to get these things done. And so we're working with many of our nonprofit organizations that are designed to help nonprofits to figure out a better way. We are working very hard to make sure that our archives, that our history is important in California. And sometimes we forget that Secretary of State's office does the archives. And it's interesting because when we think about why we don't understand things and why young people don't respond to things, or why we don't respond to things, it's so often because we don't know our history. We don't know who has built this state, who's built this nation. We don't understand the legacy that has been handed to us. And so we have a responsibility to improve our archives. And so if you get on our website and look at what's happening with the archives, you will be impressed with the fact that that we have begun to expand it to women, to people of color, to those who are disabled. I mean, we're going to have, we have an archive that is quite expansive and that is accessible, not just when you come to Sacramento and go to the archives, but basically online. You can basically tap into all of the material that's there. And we hope you will share in the archives so that people have a sense of who we are and where we are and how we struggle. I spent most of my academic life at the university dealing with the issues of history. And I was amazed at, with all the things that I've studied, what I still don't know. And I know that we've got a big movement to get women involved in STEM education. And then, of course, when we discover that the foundation of the hidden figures, that we discovered that the foundation of the space travel was really Black women, it shocked all of us. And I said to myself, just think what would have happened if we had known that. We wouldn't have to have these massive movements to help women of color like math and science. They would know that this is second nature to them, that they are the foundation of the greatest activities that occurred, which is our space travel. And so, but we didn't know it. And some of them were still alive. That's the thing that was so amazing to all of us, is that here was a piece of history that we didn't know. And we're out here trying to correct what we think is a problem that really wasn't a problem, that women can do math and science and do it really well. And so so I say to myself, just knowing our history inspires us and would have changed the trajectory of a lot of young people if they had had the information essential. So our archives are trying to chronicle the history of everyone that's been in California, everyone that's made a difference, or even those who've had struggles in California, just to educate us about who we are so that we can obviously take advantage of the rich history and also avoid the errors of the past. But the Secretary of State also is very involved with elections. And I think most of you know that the election system in this nation is in peril, that people are challenging and questioning. We've had over 300 bills passed and offered in different states, and many of them passed to basically limit people's right to vote, to create, once again, these Jim Crow laws that you can't give somebody a drink of water in line, that you can't open polls after noon on Sundays. Because why? Because Black churches were organizing and putting folks in buses and taking them to vote in Georgia. And so now you can't, the polls can't be open after noon. I mean, all of these things to really restrict that have absolutely no relevance whatsoever to voting, but has only relevance to those who want to limit those in terms of voting. We saw the greatest turnout in 2020 in California. I think we've had it once or twice in California's history, but over 80% of our people went to vote, over 80%. And we currently have 81, 83% of all eligible voters registered in California right now. And we're working, my staff is working hard, our outreach folks, to basically get those numbers up so that we can even have greater numbers of those who are voting in California. And you would think that with that kind of reality, that kind of participation in democracy, that people would be dancing in the streets, that they would be ecstatic about the fact that folks are voting. Isn't this wonderful? They would be just doing things. And instead, they are once again challenging. Are we sure that every person who voted was really a qualified voter? And yet they have no evidence that they weren't. Are we really sure that we should allow folks who are ex-offenders to vote? I mean, this is a challenge we face, not because people have found something wrong, but because they want to shape and define and limit the participation. Even though we know that the democracy is based on good participation, but there are those who don't believe that everyone should have the right to vote. And while we thought we had killed that monster some years ago, it is still raising its head in many, many states that are still counting ballots from 2020. I mean, and coming up with the same result over and over again. But it is once again just an attack on our democracy, an attack on those who don't believe everyone should vote. It's interesting that in California we believe we're protected, that we don't have those problems, and mainly we don't have some of those problems because we have a legislature that is not going to author those kind of crazy bills. But we do have people constantly attacking the voting in small areas. We have folks who are attacking many of our registrar voters in terms of attacking what they do and physically walking in and attacking many of our registrar voter offices, staffs, and so forth and so on. We've had to call in resources to basically stop that. We've had people telling our poll workers, I know where you live kind of conversation. And so as a result of that, people feel threatened by it. So we've had to make available our Safe at Home program for those who are working our polls to give them some level of protection. I mean, this is kind of the crazy stuff that people do. And we are working to make sure that doesn't happen. We are working with, as I know you were getting ready to have my favorite AG on, Mr. Bonta, but we're working with Mr. Bonta's office and others to make sure that people understand that anyone who attacks the polls, the voting system, who basically threatens the life of those who are trying to vote and those who are administering our voting, anyone who does that will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We will not take this as boys be boys kind of attitude. Well, we're going to make sure, because once you open up that can of worms that people feel that the folks are vulnerable, we won't find people to work in our polls. People will be afraid to go vote. And so we want to make sure that people understand that this is serious and that we're serious about it. But equally important, we have opened up, obviously, the opportunity to vote extensively. When I was chair of the elections committee, we did a number of things to make sure that voting was accessible. And as a result of COVID, which has brought a lot of things that were negative into the environment, but it also brought in some positive things. The fact that we can meet remote, but equally important that we basically did vote by mail. that people had apprehensions about what would happen if everybody got a ballot that was mailed in to them. And what we saw was that, one of our slogans is more days, more ways, that if you have more ways to vote, you're going to vote, that you can vote 11 days in advance in some counties. You can vote at home. You can vote at a ballot box. You can go into the polls themselves. You have more ways. And so we took away every excuse that people had for not voting. And they had time to think about it. They had time to participate. And what we've seen is a continued engagement in voting. And we're continuing to push that agenda. And as I close, we're also at this point registering people everywhere we go. We're running town halls across the state so people understand what the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was about, so that they understand why it's so important to fight against these rules and regulations, these draconian regulations that folks have to try to limit people's right to vote. So we're running town halls across the state concerning voting and voting opportunities that are there. We've got competition going on in our campuses, every Cal State, every UC, and over half of our community colleges and our private institutions have a campaign, have what they call a ballot bowl, where these students are registering students and they have a competition to register students on their campuses. I was at Cal State Chico. They won the award during the recall. Cal State Fullerton won the award during the 2020 election. So our young people are engaged and involved. That's there. We're also registering high school students, because legally we can register to students from 16 to 18. We register them, we engage them, we help them to understand. And then when they become 18, we send them a letter saying, congratulations, now's your first time to vote. But in addition to that, we are also offering them the opportunity to work at the polls. And we've already sent out the notice, and we've got lots and lots of schools and school districts saying, our students want to work on the polls. We pay them, we train them, and it's a great way for them to get engaged early so that voting becomes a part of their tradition in their family. But let me say, as I try to close here, that it's my honor to be the Secretary of State. It's good that we have a senior in the leadership who can represent you. But it's also, I tell folks in addition to that no one knows better the challenges of the democracy than this group right here. We have been through the journey. We have seen the challenges. We know who the enemy is. We fought him and won occasionally. But we have the knowledge, and it is our responsibility really to share it and to transfer it, to help young people understand why this is so extremely important, what we have done over the years, and why they have the responsibility to maintain it. When I was in the assembly, I used to always say that democracy and freedom and inclusion and justice were rare flowers. And when you have a rare flower, you have to prune it, you have to water it, you have to love it, you have to take care of it. But I say that hatred, discrimination, all the things we see are weeds, and they grow best in neglect. And so when we neglect our democracy, when we don't prune it and change and nurture it and care for it, it becomes that weed of hate, that weed of discrimination, that weed of exclusion. And we then have to go back, and we know what it is when you sleep on your garden. You know what it is when you go back outside. You've got twice as much work to do in order to get it back together. And so we have to maintain this garden of democracy. We have to work on it consistently, work to make it happen. We have to make sure that we are pruning it, caring it, and loving for it, and that we're handing to the generation, not just the democracy itself, but the legacy of care, the legacy of engagement, and the legacy that is so essential so that we continue to offer not to only our state and our communities, but to the world as an example of what a democracy is, the benefits of it, and why we struggle so hard to keep it. Thank you for having me with you this morning. I appreciate it so much. And we will continue to struggle together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. My goodness, you are inspirational. Whenever I start thinking about wanting to retire from political life, I hear you and I say, well, maybe another year or two. So thank you. Do you have time for a few questions?
I do, most definitely.
Great. So if you have a question for Dr. Weber, please raise your virtual hand and we will call on you.
My virtual hand. Okay.
Sherry, I see you. Please unmute.
Hi, Dr. Weber. It's really a pleasure to hear you. I'm wondering what we can do in California to make Election Day a state holiday and, lead the nation towards the national holiday.
We have California has offered that that bill several times, and it's gotten through some parts of the House. I think the challenge is it's the economic piece in terms of when you do a holiday, you have to pay for it. And so which means those who are off would be paid, and then those who could not take off because of services that have to be offered are paid 2 and 3 times more. So that the real challenge has been economic. That's number one. Number two, there's a real question now as to whether or not it's actually necessary in California because of us getting our ballot so early, having time to vote. A national holiday was designed really for those who couldn't take off from work to go vote on that specific day. When you look at the amount of time we have now in most counties, 11 days, we have Saturdays and Sundays in terms of voting. We offered that because we had such low voter turnout. The other piece, of course, is that too often when we do a holiday like that, the persons who deserve it or need it the most are not the ones who have it available to them. Right. We have a holiday, everyone doesn't get the holiday. Often those folks who have jobs that don't give them an opportunity to take a couple of hours off, who work long hours beyond the 5 or 6 o'clock and have other kind of responsibilities are not the ones who get the day off. It's generally often our government workers who already get 2 hours off for personal business if they want to, and those kinds of things. So I'm not sure if it'll come back now that we've got in California, particularly now that we have the Voters Choice Act, and now we mail everybody a ballot. We probably will assess and see whether or not it would be necessary for us to do it in order to increase the participation. So that's one of the challenges. It may create more opportunities for persons to work at the polls, but keep in mind we've limited that also because we have vote centers now. And we may discover that most people are voting by mail and voting days in advance. And so it probably served a purpose some while ago. It may not now, as we've seen the number of participants increase. So I assume we will assess it. There are those who still want the holiday, but their arguments are not as strong as they used to be.
I guess we need it in Alabama where they have no early voting.
See, Alabama would never pass that, Right. Or become a federal holiday, but not a state holiday, But now that we've opened up so many opportunities for people to vote, we see the increase in participation. We even have, you can register online. You can register when you get when you get your license. So we have not. I remember one of my friends told me that her parents never voted it was actually up in the hills of Virginia, one of the coal mining areas, because you had to register to vote at the county seat. And the county seat was only open from 9 to 4. And her parents couldn't afford to take off from work to drive into the county seat to register to vote. Well, we don't have that kind of reality in California. People can register sitting in their homes. They can register when they get their license. And so we've opened up the franchise significantly that a holiday may or may not be necessary for us. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Howard?
Yes, Dr. Weber, I'm a child of the 60s, and it was during that period of time when you could get killed in Vietnam but not vote. That occurred. So I was wondering about teaching people that additional history as well to encourage younger folks to vote.
Oh, no question, no question. We do that when we deal with our high schools and our college students. We've increased their voting record significantly. I can't remember the numbers, as well as their participation. I think when we were doing the voter registration, we had something like, I think during the presidential election, we had some close to 80,000 students who actually registered to vote, of those who hadn't already registered. Let's keep in mind, we allow them to register to vote when they register for classes, okay? And so it's not just on the campus alone. We have a memorandum of understanding with our CSUs, UCs, community colleges, that when students register for classes, they can click and register to vote as well. So we've opened up this franchise, and we'll continue to do that. We're working with them. We're planning a big summit for our colleges and high school students in April around the issue of voting and getting them in the practice of doing it. So so we're seeing great results from that. But yes, they need to understand that as well. Yeah, that there's a responsibility and that we worked hard because of that. I didn't get a chance to register to vote till I was 21, but I worked hard to make sure those who were 18 got a chance to vote, because the Vietnam War made it very clear that they were full citizens by the time they were 18. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and our last question comes from Michelle Krug. You need to unmute, Michelle.
Oh, thank you for the button. Dr. Weber, it's always an honor to have you in our spaces. I wanted to ask how we can best help you protect us and voting rights. I know this is obviously an issue federal all the way through the state, county, et cetera. But what can we as a caucus and as individuals do? If you can give us some asks, like in driving people to your educational opportunities, or what can we do?
Well, you know what I would really like to do, because someone talked to me the other day about it, and I'd like to get a group of you organized with my outreach group to make sure that we're doing whatever we need to do for outreach, not only with young people, but with our seniors as well. And we've got lots of folks who are volunteering, obviously, to reach out to young people, but we don't have a significant number who work reaching out to our seniors and those who may be housebound or who may not understand how to do the ballots and those kinds of things. So Janelle Jackson is my outreach person. And if you guys can shoot me a couple of names, I will that she interact. We can have a caucus that really, and we'll think of a really good name for you, because you're the caucus that has the more treads, obviously, than anybody else on their wheels, and basically understands the journey that we're on. And so, but I think we need a caucus in my office that really focuses on seniors, and that really works hard to make sure that all of our seniors take advantage of the information that we have and can help us in the various places where they are to register individuals, to make sure everyone in their facility, if they're living in a senior facility, is registered to vote, making sure that we have adequate access to all of the voting apparatus and things that we have. So I would love to have what they used to call us the Gray Panthers engaged with voting, because you guys have time and energy, but more importantly, you have knowledge, and that is and it should not be tossed away. So we've tried to use, when we do our town halls, we always use some seniors who understand what it's like, as someone just did a minute ago, to not be able to vote. Who understands what it's like, because they were either victims of Jim Crow laws, or they couldn't vote till they were 21 and they had to go to war, all those kinds of things. So we always include some historical piece in our town halls. So would love to get the name of some of you who might be interested in participating.
Thank you. What a great segue. That would be one thing that this caucus would be, I know, excited to participate in. So if anybody's interested, please email CDP Senior Caucus at gmail.com. And I will absolutely get that information to you, Dr. Weber, at your staff. And all I can say is it has been an honor and a pleasure to feature you at our caucus. Thank you so much.
It's a good start to my morning. I appreciate it. You guys have a great day, and look forward to working with you on all these issues that are important. I appreciate you so much. Take care.